This is a video about Patrick Rothfuss, but don't fear, I'll try to make it about myself as well. Cheers! Welcome back everybody to me talking about something that just came up and I feel the need to rant or something of the sorts. And today we'll be talking about Patrick Rothfuss and the drama around the missing charity chapter, so to speak. And I'll try to be fair and balanced and try to explain why I think there's more to that discourse than just the surface layer, and why I think that's part of why this has ended so bitterly so far. Before we start, let me make this very clear. I'm not a huge fan of Patrick Rothfuss. I've read the first book, The Name of the Wind. I've not read The Wise Man's Fear, nor the novella, nor anything else. I have stopped following him on social media a long time ago. I just don't care that much. But I do see some things in Patrick Rothfuss that I think are important to talk about, and we'll talk about that when I try to do the thing and make it all about myself. With that out of the way, let's get started. And we start with a quick summary. So, for years, I mean decades now, Patrick Rothfuss has run a charity called World Builders, where people donate money which gets sent to provide aid, food, and stuff like that for people in need. It's run for a long time now, and fairly successfully from all I could see. Part of that charity has always been that Pat Rothfuss himself and other, friends, authors, editors, and so forth have offered some form of reward and thank you things for, people who donate a certain amount of money, or if specific goals have been reached. That's what has been done for a long time. Now, the last time, or 1.5 years ago, Pat Rothfuss promised, among other things, that if a certain amount of money was raised, he would publish a first chapter, not the first chapter, but a first chapter out of his long-awaited novel, The Doors of Stone. And that money was, that amount of money was reached, and the chapter is still missing. And then for a while, he kind of went dark. And now he came back and talked about why the chapter is not yet out. And that's what happened. Now, during that wait for that missing chapter, a lot of people have started to call Rothfuss a scammer, been very loud about that, and his explanation has not been received very well by a lot of people who claim that A, he did not apologize and not say sorry, which makes it basically meaningless because they were not expecting an explanation but an apology, and, claim basically that he lied and the chapter doesn't even exist, and so forth. It goes into all kinds of directions. And this is where we are right now. Sometimes people just give Rothfuss some advice on what he should just do, like publish the thing in the way it is right now, or whatever. It's just the way it is right now, and it's a huge mess. I think it's important to understand how it actually came to this, and why this is generally a problem with many facets, on not just one easy person to blame. That's what we'll do now, and we'll start with talking about charity for a second. Alright, so what's charity? Charity is when people give up their money to do something good and get a warm, fuzzy feeling in return. That's it at its core. It's always also been about, building reputation and so forth. It's been around for, something over 150 years in the current form, and we need to talk about capitalism real quickly because it's fundamental to it. But this is not a capitalism bad video as such. So here's the thing. Charity has always been done mostly by people who can afford to give money for those in need, and that's a great thing. It does, of course, not solve the actual fundamental problems that lead to people being in need, but it, does at least mitigate the harm we as societies do to our planet and those less fortunate. So it's a good thing, but it's not the be-all, end-all of how to make this world a better place. However, as I said, it does, in general, give us a warm, fuzzy feeling. Some religions do actively encourage being charitable to those in need, and there's oftentimes a connection to those virtues embedded in charitable language and charity language, but it's not only that. And as I said, it also gives us more than just a little warm fuzzy feeling of having done something good. It also gives us the reputation of having done something good, something we can use. And that's certainly how a lot of rich folks have often used their charities. Like, well, they're apparently making a lot of more money than anyone else, but at least they're also donating it, at least parts of it, to something good. So they can't be all bad, right? That's part of the mechanics. And over time, this has obviously spread to more people. So what you get is people getting, like, I don't know, some kind of badge or something that shows to everyone else that they have done the good thing, that they have partaken in a charity. Now, this is where things become more difficult. Because, see, charity is giving something and not getting something back. That's the idea. It is not transactional in the way that so much of our society is, where we expect to get paid if we give something money or do something, where we expect, a transaction to happen. It is exactly not that. But fear not, because it has become that. See, that's kind of where the whole idea of getting more than just a warm fuzzy feeling comes from. You get a boost to your reputation, and then sooner or later you get other more tangible things as a thank you for being such a nice person and donating money. And once that's on the table, well, that's when we're back with transactions, right? And the problem with transactions is that we expect them to actually be fulfilled, right? To be honored. Pacta servanta sunt, or the other way, pacta sunt servanda, as Romans probably never said. Point is, we expect things that get promised when we give something, we expect those promises to be kept, and we kind of consider them to be more like a contract than just a friend saying, yeah, I'll do that. And that's where the whole mess starts, because at that point, we kind of lose track of the idea of charity, which is giving something for nothing in return, just because it's a good thing to do that. Nevertheless, obviously, we're in this state and frame of mind at this point, so we need to be aware that if something gets promised during a charity, the same way something gets promised during, say, a Kickstarter or other crowdfunding campaign, where these rewards are officially just thank yous and not an actual buying a book or buying a whatever else. Nevertheless, the expectation is there for these promises to be fulfilled. And when they're not, we get pissed off and we get disappointed and we get sad, because it is a breach of trust. But in a world where everything is framed as an economic transaction, we use the language of scam and not just the language of, disappointment or a trust being breached. And that's where the cries of Rothfuss scammed his fans comes from, because in a legal sense it didn't, because the money went to charity, and that's that. So the money did not get used for something it wasn't destined to be used for. Nevertheless, that's just, legalese, and we need to talk about something else. And that is because, of course, he did do something to his fans. And we need to talk about his fans, his fandom, and parasocial relationships. Look, this is the year 2023, and this is the internet. You've probably heard about parasocial relationships. I'll try to make it short, because it's it's been around for a while, and it's important. So what's a parasocial relationship? It's, in fact, a social relationship where only one side can interact, and the other side is either not aware of the relationship or, for all kinds of technical reasons, not able to respond. That's why they're parasocial, not social. It started out with in the 50s with television stars, where it's the influence that television actors, newscasters, and so forth had on people and how people interacted with them or created a relationship in their mind with them. And it has moved on from there. The important aspect is that while parasocial relationships are very strong and can be very strong, they get even stronger when there is at least a little feedback. And that's where the internet comes in, because, in the times of social media, in the times of live streaming, YouTube or whatever, those people on the receiving end of a parasocial relationship, they can interact up to a point. You can read out super chats, you can respond to comments on your YouTube feed and so forth, and that strengthens that bond or that feeling of relationship, at least for, the people that have that parasocial relationship. Some people call it a parasocial relationship 1 0.5 or something like that. There's, terminology is still all over the place. But it is important to understand that someone like Patrick Rothfuss is certainly, and the fans of Patrick Rothfuss do have parallel social relationships with the author, because we always have that with authors. We even have it with fictional characters, don't get me wrong. But in the days in which authors do write on their blog, do live streams on Twitch where they read out super chats and stuff like that, it's a topic that is important. And I think in the case of Pat Rothfuss, that those parasocial relationships are especially strong for a lot of reasons, and these make the whole thing even more of a mess. One thing important, though, is that parasocial relationships can be everything from romantic attachment over, making someone like a good friend in your mind, or trusting them, or making them a bit of an avatar of your own struggles, all the way to really hating them. Negative parasocial relationships or anti-fandoms are a thing, right? That's also out there. And now let's look at why the parasocial aspect of the fandom interaction with Pat Rothfuss is so intense. And that's when we start talking about mental health, but we'll come back to it later. Patrick Rothfuss has often been very vocal about his struggles with mental health and his struggles with ADHD. And that's an important aspect here, because that makes him a prime target for other people struggling with these kinds of things. He's open about it. If we struggle with mental health, with neurodiversity, and so forth, we have someone we can look up to and see how they deal with it. And that's certainly something you can see in Pat Rothfuss' fandom. There's a lot of conversations online about how, there's neurodiversity rep in some of his books, and there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of awareness in that area. The problem with that is, of course, that it makes people more reliant or more attached to Patrick Rothfuss if they themselves, also struggle with some of these issues. And that's exactly what we see in that fandom. Once again, there's also the other side, that people with certain forms of neurodiversity can be pretty annoying. And Pat Rothfuss can be incredibly annoying. It's easy to not like, it's easy to dislike Pat Rothfuss. You ever watch one of his older panel appearances at conventions? Gods, the man's a major pain in the ass. He truly is. And then he doesn't even actually get out his books in time. And all the praise he's gotten for the first two books suddenly seems overblown. And it's so easy to then build up a negative parasocial relationship with Pat Rothfuss. Plus, of course, positive parasocial relationships can switch into negative ones if, you feel that trust has been betrayed, if you just change as a person, and so forth. And Pat Rothfuss, with, taking 15 years or whatever it is by now to not finish The Doors of Stone, the third book of his trilogy, with taking way too long when it comes to responding, when reacting angry when people ask him after the book, and so forth. He's certainly given people disposed to, ending their positive parasocial relationship and turning it into a negative one. He's certainly given enough reasons, enough straws to break enough camels' backs here. And that, I think, has led overall to Pat Rothfuss' fandom and anti-fandom being such a passionate situation. You have a lot of people who see part of themselves in what he does, how he does, and so forth, and feel seen and represented by his works and by him as a person. And then you have a lot of people who just really, really are disappointed with him because they were in the previous camp, or just find it incredibly annoying, and maybe just think that his reputation, or the reputation of his first two books, is massively overblown and overhyped, and that's always been a good reason to hate someone on the internet. So there is a lot of passion in the Patrick Rothfuss, and I call it fandom at this point, which doesn't make things easier. Now we need to move on to one more thing here, which is narratives, and then we can dive into mental health. Because, see, there is a narrative that is very strong in our society, and that is the narrative of overcoming all odds, of overcoming adversity, of succeeding against all odds, and so forth. And it means, well, some people would call it a hero's journey, but we kind of expect people, when they suffer and are in a dark place and so forth, to come back victorious. And that's a very seductive narrative and very powerful narrative, especially if you yourself or I am suffering from certain problems with my mental health and struggling with chronic illness and so forth. Seeing someone on which we can project part of what I feel, for example, seeing that person overcome that is what we want. We can make these people our avatars. We can make them, we can point to them as like, see, you can be neurodivergent and struggle with depression and anxiety, and you can still be a best-selling author succeeding and so forth. We put our hopes and the things we wish to do and constantly fear we can't. We put all of that hope in someone else. And when they then don't fulfill our hopes, the feeling of betrayal is even more strong. It's even more powerful. And there's the other side. We want to be those heroes, right? We expect ourselves to do the same thing. We want to be the heroes. We want to overcome adversity and make that triumphal return and be victorious and be beloved by everyone for actually being the hero. We want that as well. Now, I would say everyone does so, but in the field of fantasy, where we read a lot of narratives, I think the impact of that story, of the hero's journey, is very powerful. That's something that we often, underestimate how much that actually drives the way we see ourselves and the way we see others. And that can have pretty bad results. So now we've put all of these things in place. Let's talk a bit about mental health and neurodiversity, and then I'll talk about myself, and then we'll try to bring it all together. All right, so mental health and neurodiversity. Patrick Rothfuss has been very open about his struggles with mental health, about his struggles with anxiety, depression, pressure, and so forth. And it's kind of understandable, right? The man wrote one or two books that everyone thought were the best thing since sliced bread. Whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. A lot of people told him that. And that raises pressure. And that can lead to, anxiety, failure, and so forth. That's one part. The other part is that Pat Rothfuss was very open about being diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. And that's not a good place, because after, being, living with ADHD undiagnosed for years, you build up a lot of coping mechanisms. And even if that diagnosis comes in and you get medication and that medication works, there's still like 20, 30, or 40 years of behaviors to be unlearned, to get rid of, and so forth. And that takes time, and that is hard. And we often think about, well, these kind of things, you get medication, suddenly you're good. You're not. You may be better, but that's it. And that's, I think, where we need to talk about me for a second, now that we've established these things. Because, see, I am diagnosed with ADHD, and I got diagnosed as an adult. I've also struggled with depression and anxiety. And I see a lot of these things in Pat Rothfuss. Remember when I said that the guy is incredibly annoying in panels? Yeah, so am I. Because, the way my brain works, and I can't obviously tell how exactly it is for Rothfuss, but I can, talk about me for a second here, and I'll explain why I think that's important. The way our brains work is, like my brain works, is like, I'm in a conversation, someone says something, and my brain flips up this card which may have a valuable insight, or may have a really dumb joke. But I need to tell it right now, which means I interrupt people, I'm loud, I'm noisy, and if there's, quieter, more reserved people in a conversation with me, I'll just absolutely bulldoze them under. And there's, if you go and watch, say, a panel with Pat Rothfuss and Robin Hobb on it, yeah, you can see how that works, because Robin Hobb is soft-spoken, and she does not actually do much when Rothfuss just runs her over. And it's incredibly painful and annoying, and it makes it very easy to hate Rothfuss. Another important aspect here is that with all of these baggages, there comes a lot of uncertainty, a lot of need for validation, a lot of need for external validation. We want people to laugh. It's why so many of us are sort of like the clown of the class and stuff like that, right? Because it gives us a direct feedback, and we're like, wow, I got it, I made it. Fantastic. And then this escalates and escalates and escalates, and it's very painful, and we should not go down that road. But it's important to understand this, I think, for what is coming next. Now, let's look at something very specific here, and the idea that Pat Rothfuss maybe didn't have the chapter written or whatever, or did not mean to, keep the promise or whatever. And this is where I talk about myself for a second. See, I have done very much the same thing on a much smaller level and so forth. I'm running a record label, and I've made promises that I couldn't keep. I made promises, I intended them to keep them, and then something came up. And I could not, for all kinds of reasons, answer an email, and then things took longer and longer and longer, and then my situation had changed to a point where I could no longer keep the promises that I made, could no longer just, because prices had changed, I couldn't suddenly pay something I promised to pay. I had, open pre-orders already, so there were people that were owed money or products and so forth. And at that point, things collapse. And you just keep promising. Or I kept promising. I kept moving forward in the full conviction that I would be able to solve the whole thing just next week if this one thing came true. And yes, you can call that lying, and it is. But it's lying to everyone, including myself, because in those situations, I believed I would be able to turn the thing around. I would be able to fix it. I would be able to, if only I could actually answer that email, look at that other thing, get that other thing together, and suddenly I'll have everything set in place and it will all go back and will be brilliant. And then I'll be vindicated. And that, I think, is once again where that idea of the hero's journey comes through. And we need that vindication. We need that love. And what happens once you're in that pit, once you're already late with your promise and so forth, you want to make that return as grand as possible to, be the hero, get people back on your side, just surprise them one more time. And you can do that, but probably not, because things keep piling up. And that's where things become really painful, because that's like when every time your phone rings, every time you get a message, every time you get an email, you cringe and you basically throw the phone away because you can't answer the things, because there's so much physical blockage. I've reached points in my life where I could physically not open and read an email because I was so afraid of what it would say. Not so much because, I could, someone complaining that an order didn't arrive, I could just pay them back. But because I was so afraid of the emotional pain it would cause me to read bad words about me, to read angry words about me. And that's something that can happen. And it's incredibly difficult to get out of that. Because saying, hey, just do it. Just admit your fuck up. Just admit it. People will understand. Yeah, I know that when I say that to other people, but when people say that to me, I still don't believe it. And I'm incredibly grateful to some people that have already helped me with this. But I still fear going back to heavy metal festivals, going back to specific places, fearing that someone will show up and just be mean to me. And it's, if all your self-worth is built on external validation, that's the worst thing that can happen. All right, so much about me. I want to bring this back to Pat Rothfuss, to mental health, and where I think this all ends. Why did I tell my story? See, we talk about mental health, and a lot of people are like, he's using mental health as an excuse. I think there's something wrong with the term mental health, because mental health has been sort of connected to wellness and self-care in very problematic ways, where we kind of think, or it's easy to think, that mental health means, do some meditation, drink some herbal teas, and you'll get your stress level down, and then everything will be fine. And that does work for a lot of things and a lot of people. But severe mental health issues and neurodiversity are chronic. These are things you can't just overcome. They stay, and they are unique. See, when you read Tolstoy and he says that every happy family is happy the same way and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way? Yeah, it's the same with mental health issues. Your neurodiversity is different from my neurodiversity. Your ADHD will be different from mine. Your depression will be different from mine. Your anxiety will be different from mine. And when we just call it mental health issues, we kind of just paper that over. And I think it's important. That's why I wanted to tell my story. It's like, I don't know if that's what Pat Rothfuss went through or goes through. I'm not Pat Rothfuss. You are not Pat Rothfuss, unless you are Pat Rothfuss, in which case, hey Pat, please like and subscribe. Anyway, my point is, we need to be aware of the fact that these are severe disabilities, severe illnesses that can keep us from things. Like, we don't expect someone with a broken arm to lift weights just after, doing some yoga. No, or we don't do that. But we kind of expect people with depression to just pop a pill and be able to go back and do the thing. We expect people with neurodiversity to overcome these things because obviously you can, after years and years and years, possibly. And I think it's important to be aware of that it's not just a slight depression here or a slight feeling of sadness for a moment. It's much more. And it's unique. And I think that's where that term of mental health kind of does inhibit an actual discourse or the actual understanding or extending grace to individuals who talk about that or don't talk about the actual details because it's their private lives. So where does that leave us? And what is the takeaway? Well, basically, the situation's fucked. You have someone who is very much reliant on feedback for validation. And you have a fandom that is incredibly passionate, either incredibly passionate negatively or incredibly passionate positively with that person, with parasocial relationships that are, well, difficult to navigate. And you have a lot of people pinning their hopes on that person, and you have that person not being able to actually, succeed, not being able to fulfill those hopes, and still requiring that feedback. And when that feedback turns negative, that just speeds up the process of digging yourself into a hole that is impossible to get out of. And that's where we are with Pat Rothfuss. Now, ideally, someone would just switch off the King Killer subreddit and force Pat Rothfuss to log off and live in a wood cabin for a year to figure out what he can do and what he can't do. But that won't happen. And unfortunately, our social media environment means that these things will keep escalating again and again and again, because that's how this whole system that we built for ourselves works. So I'm going to finish this with a look at something. I've talked about the Malazan Book of the Fallen for a long time, and one thing that is important there is the extending of empathy and compassion to everyone. See, my point here is, has Pat Rothfuss fucked up? The answer is yes. Should he find a way to make it up? Yes, of course. But it's important to also extend some compassion and empathy and understand that maybe he just can't right now. He just absolutely can't, because just because he's a rich and famous author doesn't mean he's, more capable of actually solving all his problems or fulfilling things or writing the emails that he has to than I am. It's just not how that works. But on the other hand, we should also extend some compassion to the people that, pinned all their hopes on their hero succeeding, of putting out that chapter, of doing the good thing and being rewarded, being part of that story of together saving the world. We need to extend compassion to these people as well. Yeah, it didn't work out because people aren't perfect. The only people kind of left in the cold are people who have no skin in the game, who haven't donated, who just like to look from the side on someone failing, because that's also obviously something that happens on the internet, and it's sad, and it's where that lack of empathy and compassion shows itself. It's where the callous cynicism of, hey, look at these people talking about mental health and then still not overcoming it comes from. It's where this, oh, look, he scammed everyone and he still gets away because those people are still too understanding comes from. Look, if you have no skin in the game, that's not your choice to make. It's someone else's choice. It's the choice of those who want to forgive or don't forgive Pat Rothfuss for taking their money. It's the choice of Pat Rothfuss of getting his shit together or trying to, or finding a way where he can live with himself. And we should leave it to those folks. These are my thoughts on the matter. I hope you learned something. I hope you have thoughts. Yell them at me down in the comments. And yeah, I don't know. Let's try to actually calm down a bit and just look at some positive things. There's a new King Killer novella coming out. I know it's an old one, never mind. Look at the positive things. And if you're done, then you're done. Cut your losses. Move on. Find something else that's fun and leave the man alone. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks and cheers.